and welcome back to Homegrown Horror Hosts, hosted by Dakota Media Access. I'm James Churchill, a local film producer here in North Dakota.
And I'm Matthew Scott, a local filmmaker in North Dakota.
Today we're going to be talking about Dracula, the 1931 film by Todd Browning. It is the first sound film adaptation of the novel by Bram Stoker. Without further ado, let's get into the film.
So what did you think of the film?
Well, the film opens up with a nice excerpt of Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky, which I absolutely loved. The version we watched does not have a score. So the film actually didn't have a score until the 90s.
Yeah, 1998. Yeah.
1998.
Yeah, almost 2000.
The version without a score, it's really interesting. It really, it starts out with that excerpt, and then it just kind of goes, into almost silence. And I think that's, a lot of people associate Swan Lake with Dracula now, just because of that opening. But at the same time, I almost think the silence of it works.
You mean throughout the film? Yeah.
Throughout the film. Yeah, there's a lot of moments where there's, just pure silence, and there's shots. And a lot of times, in a lot of modern films, they almost rely too heavily on score.
Yeah, it's supplementary at that point, where they're like, we don't have anything good to show, so we'll just blast some music, and then they'll feel the right way.
Yeah, this movie really takes time to hold on those shots and really lets the viewer get in and contemplate what's actually happening, and not overloading you with information with all the score and all the sound effects and everything. It's very simplistic.
Along with the silence, the lack of color, obviously, since it's a 1930s film, it's black and white.
Yes.
Which then means all the lighting in it is fantastic. Everything.
Of course.
Yeah. Every lighting setup is as exactly as it should be, especially when it's centering around Dracula. He's got like I don't think there were too many lights coming from under, which usually is like the horror thing to do, but he had like the light on the eyes and stuff like that.
I'm not exactly sure how it looked behind the scenes, but it almost looks like, and I do want to get into this, I want to get into this a little bit later on, but it almost looks like they have two separate tiny little spotlights to shine on each eye. And sometimes in the shot you can see that it looks like it's just off by a little bit, but I mean, it's a little quirk of the time, I guess, like the light. But I mean, for me as a filmmaker, I can appreciate that, because then I can sort of appreciate the detail that they went into, in making two little individual lights. And it could very well be a little...
Yeah, but it's more unique in a way if you were doing it
it
too
really
small. It
really looks like it's just one light for each eye, and that it's intense. But what I really want to talk about first is actually the writing and the story of Dracula. Now, I have not read the novel.
And I haven't either.
I'll be honest. I have not read the novel, so I can't really say which aspects of the writing come from the novel and which come from the film. But what I thought was sort of quirky, and maybe just a sign of how it's a very old film, but there's a lot of telling and not showing.
Yeah, it's more of like a play.
It really is.
Where everything is, all the actors, their acting is that style where they're going above and beyond the more subtle acting of today, which is it's a sign of the times and stuff. Especially with what's his name, Renfield, right?
Yeah, Renfield.
When he gets later in the film, when he gets more like crazy.
Yes.
His transformation from the beginning when he's just like, I'm going to see Dracula. And then later he's like freaking out and like completely like 100% anything. And any emotion that's he's supposed to have is like at 100.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
beautiful. No, because I have this specific memory. There's 2 instances of this happening. She's describing her dream with Dracula. She's talking about these red, these big red eyes and all of this. And that's where I sort of first noticed that they really do tell a lot. They tell the viewer a lot. And to a degree, that could be intentional because you are kind of leaving the viewer in the dark from some of the more terrifying aspects, and you can bring it on. I mean, the film trick that you would use in the modern day is that you would sort of have the character describe what happens, and then later on you would show that same thing happening to someone else to sort of build suspense of it. They don't exactly do that in this film. And then the second instance is, of course, what you're talking about with Renfield describing how Dracula gave him these visions of like thousands of rats, millions of rats just for you. Which I think, obviously they probably had him tell that to the viewer instead of showing it, because doing that might have been a little impractical.
Maybe that's the intention, because we're supposed to be almost from Van Helsing's point of view, or not his point of view, but the people around him who he's trying to convince, like, oh yeah, Dracula's the vampire. And you're not seeing these things, but you're hearing about them, and that's like bringing up, it's almost like a gaslighting kind of effect, where you're like, oh no, that's just horror stories, and then these things just start becoming just proving themselves, basically.
Yes.
Like, especially, this is a little bit off what we were talking about, but when Mr. Harkin grabs a cigarette and he opens the cigarette box and has the mirror, and it's also a thing about the editing in this, that sometimes it's just like that, and it's just like you see a shot for like a split second and it's gone, and then other times it's really slow editing. Like,
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I feel like we're missing a lot of that in today's films.
Yeah, if editing now is like, we need to do 20 different shots in 2 seconds. Over
time, the average length of a shot in a film has tended to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And it's really refreshing to see a film that does take that time and takes the time,
holds on something,
to hold on something and really let you sit in there in the moment and contemplate it before cutting away.
Well, it also helps with like the set design, like the crazy stairs at near the end of the thing, and
beautiful.
Just all the houses, everything is so ornate and like
it is.
Yeah,
it's
meticulously put in the place that needs to be.
I was a little, if we're talking about the set design.
Do you want to talk about the cardboard?
No, we'll talk about that in a bit. But where you first sort of can appreciate the set design is right when he makes it to Dracula's castle, and you see all the spider webs and the broken structures, and you can really tell that this is a place that has not been touched for centuries, right? I mean,
and it adds to the authenticity of it. Like, this is somewhere that someone lived, 300 years ago.
I mean, there's a few things that are a little goofy to look at, like the absolutely massive, gigantic spider web that would be impossible, like, for a real spider to make.
Maybe it's a big spider. Renfield talks about the spider. He's like, a big, fat, juicy spider, all for me.
Spiders are, they are a theme throughout the film. When he gets to Dracula's castle, one of the first things Dracula says to him is, "His spider weaves its web for a small fly, unsuspecting."
I wonder what that could mean.
I just
It's pretty vague.
It's the most obvious least obvious foreshadowing ever.
I was really lost during this film.
I couldn't help but laugh because it's just Renfield is just ignoring all of the most obvious red flags known to man. It's like, even if you don't I'm sorry, even if you don't know about vampires or anything about that, like,
you run into someone that lives there and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go see Dracula, and every person is like, Dracula?
Dude, if I go to somebody's house and I see and it looks like that house has been abandoned for like the past 200 years, I'm turning right around.
You don't go searching for ghosts?
No.
You don't have ghost adventures?
But Renfield didn't even believe in ghosts.
Oh yeah.
So, no.
What did you think of the film that was based on Dracula before this was Nosferatu?
Yes.
Which obviously you know the one I'm talking about.
Yes.
And in this one, like that one, he's like this, like disgusting monster, like
yes.
like almost like a rat human hybrid thing. But in this one, he's like a suave.
Exactly.
It basically is like the defining thing that's been Dracula for the last century or so.
Yes.
Like when you think of Dracula, you think of him.
Really, you do.
Yeah.
And for good, I think it's justified because
it's perfect.
This is the definitive Dracula, and that's sort of what I want to talk about. What I want to get into now is just the performance by Legacy. He is phenomenal. Like, the standards for acting in Hollywood were a lot lower, just in general, or acting for films were a lot lower back then. But his performance in this film would rival any of the best performances even today. It is amazing. He is Dracula. Like, he really is. There's, for good reason, this is why this is the definitive depiction of Dracula. But not only that, from a writing perspective, I think having a suave, sort of charismatic, very influential, wealthy Dracula works, and it adds to the horror of his character, that he is this really influential person, and you see this archetype, even in real life with, serial killers who have been very charismatic in the past, people like Ted Bundy, very charismatic people, and they're able to influence their victims into positions that allow them to strike. And Dracula is the perfect example of that, and I just think it works so well, and it is so terrifying. I mean, obviously, watching an old film, it's sort of hard for us to get scared by it nowadays.
There's no point in the film where I mean, it's hard for any film, even modern, even Long Legs. I didn't.
It's true. Yeah, me personally, I mean, I guess, sure.
It's more of the thrill of the story than literally being jumping out of your seat.
Yeah. I might be a little bit biased about that though, because I'm classically not scared by films at all in general.
Well, it's hard when you know how things are set up. Like everything behind the scenes, you understand. It's not just something supernatural you're watching. But
there are some there are things that take you out of the film, like the goofy practical effects, like with the bat.
But
the bat's really goofy.
At times, it looks like a bat. At times, you can see the strings.
I saw the strings every time.
I don't know. There's sometimes it looked fine. Near the end when Mina's already taken over or whatever, and she's talking to Harkin, or actually she's talking to the bat's talking to her, and he's trying to wave it away. That looked like a real bat at that point, but it was also pretty high up, so you probably couldn't see the strings or anything.
Yeah, I suppose so.
This kind of has to do with the writing, but usually in horror movies, at least modern day ones, people are just stupid. Like
That's true.
They're so like not how Renfield was ignorant, where
Yeah.
like that's like a
Renfield, like, yes, Renfield at the beginning is like the classic
Yeah,
horror movie character, like especially horror movie protagonist archetype.
yeah, just completely ignorant of everything around them. But every other character, like even like Mr. Harkin
yeah.
gets like fooled the whole time, but I mean he
Yeah.
still acts like a human.
I mean, it's really like the character Van Helsing.
Nothing gets by him. Like he
He is,
understands like right away. He's like, oh, vampire. Got to stab him.
I would have liked to see, Van Helsing is he's introduced a little bit late into the film for my liking. I would have. I mean, this is another thing actually. So I mean, Van Helsing he's our good guy, but I would argue that he's not really our protagonist of the film. I mean, he's introduced a little bit.
Who is the protagonist?
A little bit
Dracula?
later. I would say Dracula is our protagonist. He really is the center focus of the film.
Oh, that's probably why they named it after him, huh?
And that might be the case for the novel as well, but I mean, I think it works really well having Dracula be basically the protagonist of the film. I mean, it's sort of hard to nail down a true protagonist because, in my opinion, the film comes across as a little unfocused as far as
Who we're following and
as far as which character we're following. I would have liked to see a version of the film where Van Helsing is introduced like at the beginning and you get sort of more of his backstory and more development on his character, because I think the way that his character is handled in this film is he's almost kind of like I don't want to say MacGuffin, but he kind of just seems to be able to
solve every problem. Yeah.
Problem for really no reason. Yeah, and it's like, oh, he's a professor, but we don't really know where he got all this knowledge from. And
yeah, like he shows up and he's like, oh, yep, we're gonna use this wolf bane. Oh, yep. I mean, the only thing we're kind of shown that he discovers, which he just already knows for some reason, is that, oh, in the mirror
thing,
you can't see him. Vampire. Because vampires are a thing we can study.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell, like, you get those 1930s influences in it with, like, the focus on, medical treatment and on science and things like that. That was very much a thing back during those times, like the 30s and 40s. There was a huge focus on, like, oh, science can solve everything, we can treat every condition in a mental hospital, like putting Renfield in a mental hospital, like I thought that was very 1930s.
Yeah, for sure.
And then having like doctors try to analyze him and all that. It's yeah, like I said, it's very 1930s. If you go back to that time, you have like commercials and like. People typically have like, not people, but there's this sort of like typical stereotype of like the 1930s, 1940s PSA with the guy with the transatlantic accent, and he's talking about how now with modern science we can do this, we can use DDT to kill all the bugs, and something like that, and I thought I really appreciated that, I guess.
That's just a product of his time. It probably wasn't intentional. It was just.
Well,
I mean, not intentional to be like pushing this idea. It was just like this is the public consciousness at the time. Like this is what people thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely in like. Yeah, that's definitely just the way that the writers and the director were just thinking about things in general. But it is just interesting to think about.
Yeah, this is completely off topic, but after doing a very light amount of research, I found out that not only did they film this once, but they filmed it twice with a completely different cast.
Yes.
Using the same sets. It said they filmed a Spanish version of the movie. The Spanish crew filmed at night, and the English crew filmed during the day. So this was filmed at the exact same time with, like, assumably just like a translated script. But the Spanish one is like 30 minutes longer.
What?
Yeah.
Huh.
So I don't know if they just cut out a bunch of stuff from this one or.
Well, okay. Well, there is the epilogue. Do you know if the epilogue is in the Spanish version?
I don't remember there being an epilogue even in the one we watched.
No,
it didn't it just end and then it's like it's a universal picture?
It does just end, but there was originally, and we talked about this when we were doing it. We found this out when we were doing our research before we watched the film. But viewers, if you don't know, there's actually an epilogue that was originally made for the film. And in that epilogue, it's basically meant to sort of...
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay,
it's a little bit of like a teaser type thing. A lot of horror movies do this nowadays. It's pretty classic nowadays, but it was essentially meant to hint to the audience that, oh, vampires might be real. You don't know. But that was eventually cut from later versions of the film because they were afraid of things like occult,
Yeah, they said something about like religious groups.
Yeah, religious group reactions and things like that. So it was eventually cut from the film, and as far as I know, there really hasn't been a restoration of that since. Like the footage is practically lost.
That's kind of sad.
The original film reels themselves have not been restored to date.
You think the Spanish version has that?
I think that could be a reason for why it's longer.
I don't think it was 30 minutes long.
No, there's no way the epilogue was. I mean, it could be 30 minutes long.
No way. But
literally half the films, like that's not an epilogue anymore. That's just Act 3. Yeah. I mean, we can get into more of like the shot composition and stuff now.
Yeah, there was one specifically I remember, the confrontation between Helsing and Dracula. Like everybody leaves the room and Dracula shows up and he's like,
yes,
he's like coming in.
Come here.
Yeah, he does like the
come here.
But the way that was shot was like, obviously they're on opposite thirds, but Helsing slowly begins to be on the same one. So every time it switches, they're in the exact same part of the frame. But then as he's like, his will is like, strong.
He regains his will back.
He slowly moves back.
I think it's I didn't
it's
even.
very subtle. Like
I didn't notice that. No, that's really interesting. So I guess they're trying to through the language of film sort of signify that
he's losing control.
Well,
Dracula is taking control of him.
Yeah, he's becoming an extension of Dracula, and to show that, they're putting him in the same place as Dracula. That's really interesting. I really liked the way that in a lot of the shots, and you pointed this out to me, Dracula is just in the direct center, and it just sort of really hammers home his like almost alien presence. I don't know. I love the way that Dracula is shot in almost every shot that he's in. Like, you can tell that, like, just the way that he's shot, like, even when he's in a shot with other characters in it, like, it's composed in such a way to give him just this absolute gravity and presence.
Yeah, he has the aura.
You can read the aura, yeah. You can tell he really changes the
mood of a scene. Like he steps in and it completely shifts from whatever it was. It completely
shifts the entire tone and the mood of the room and the scene that he's in, and it's just amazing how they were able to achieve that effect. What I really, really loved about this film was the close-ups.
Yeah, they're always spot on, especially with Dracula, obviously.
Especially Dracula.
Like, there's always ones where he's just staring right into the camera.
It's amazing. And again, the actor's performance of Dracula really drives it home. I mean, but the film really wants the viewer to spend time like contemplating the face of Dracula and showing his demeanor and his.
It's almost lack of emotion. Like he has like his persona, his suave, but every time it's him by himself, he's like almost a statue. He's completely stationary, like the way he moves too. He like, that might just also be a 30s thing, but even compared to the other actors, he moves very like
he's
not
so
stiff, but like
he is. I mean, he really is.
But when he moves, it's not like, it's not like robotic.
No.
It's smooth.
Yes.
But it's like he stops exactly where the mark is,
I know. He moves like you said, it's almost stiff, but at the same time he moves like so fluidly.
Yeah.
Through his stiff movements, and it really just like he sells so well the idea that he's not human. Like he's not moving like a human. He doesn't make faces like a human. He doesn't talk like a human. It's amazing.
The best part about that is when like Helsing tries to put up the mirror to him, and he like has all this lead up, and Dracula's like, what are you doing here? And he just breaks. Like that's just like a very they say animalistic, but it's just like more of a human reaction. Like
the sheer break of character. Yeah. But then he almost immediately afterwards like
composes himself, and he's like, Helsing will tell you why. Like, blah, blah,
yes, blah. I love. I love that moment that he has between then and when he like recomposes himself. He just has this moment of realization. His whole plan, like he's got to change everything now, and he realizes like I just completely broke character in front of all these people. Like again with the close-ups, I like the moment at the beginning of the film when he's giving the wine to Renfield, and you pointed this out when we watched it, that he it's like the exact same shot intercut with, it's like the exact same close-up, right? And nothing about it is changing at all except for Dracula's face. And I just think it's so interesting because it's really drawing attention to the idea, like the changes that's happening in Dracula himself. I think it's beautiful because in a lot of films, when you're trying to show like a character's internal like thoughts and psyche going on, a lot of times they'll just have them literally think it out loud to the camera, right? But I think this is such a beautiful way to do it because you can't tell what he's thinking, and you don't know what he's thinking. But at the same time, you'd know that whatever he's thinking, it's something sinister. And that's terrifying and also just genius.
Slightly kind of like that, like when they have, I think, two different shots, almost the exact same thing when he gets up out of the coffin. Like they have the shot of the two coffins, and then it pans over to show through the window it's night, and then it shows he's out. The first time he's just like standing upright, like looking straight out, he's probably thinking or whatever. But the second time he's kind of like looking down, almost like defeated.
Is this the beginning of the film?
No, well, I think the first one is near the beginning, but the second one where he's like looking down, it's pretty close to the end, like the last time before he goes back and gets stabbed and all that. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's almost like that's the point he accepts his fate. He's like, I know I can't do this anymore. Yeah. I'm going to get caught.
What I was really sort of shocked by was like the weakness of Dracula.
He can't really do much unless he like is able to seduce someone or like manipulate them subtly.
Like his true power is just his ability to control people. Apart from that, he really doesn't have much at all, which is sort of that's very different from the modern depictions of vampires. Like you have you know, like Twilight, where vampires are basically just completely indestructible. I mean, I find it really interesting how Dracula, like, humors the humans so much. Like, he's playing their game, right? Like, he's accepting their terms and playing their game, which is really interesting to me. Like, I mean, it's obviously a huge blunder on his part, like, as a villain, like, accepting their terms and playing their game. But it's just sort of like, he's there and he's found out by all of the humans when they do the mirror trick, right? And it's sort of like, I don't know, I feel like he could have just killed all of them. Right
Yeah,
there.
he literally could have just turned into a wolf and just ate them all.
Yeah.
Like, what are they gonna do?
So it's sort of just, you know, it's intriguing for him as a character to continue playing their game.
Well, maybe
through.
that's the thing. Like, he can't do what wolves do. He can just turn into, like, the appearance of it, because he's not, you know, with him being shown as not really being there in the mirror, he might as well not even actually be there. He could just be like an illusion.
But even then, like, as Van Helsing says in the film, there's only one way to kill a vampire, and that's to drive the stake through his heart while he's asleep.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, what if he's just always in that box? Like, that the body is always in that box, but it's like the spirit or whatever.
It's his projection.
Yeah.
That could be true.
I mean, that could be like why he can do all these things. I mean, they don't really show the bite marks, but they talk about them, so those do happen. So that would be like the only thing destroying my theory here, but
he's just very weak, like, as a creature. Like, you know, the modern depictions of vampires show them as having, like, super strength and, you know, all this, but it's very possible that, and I mean, he's technically a walking corpse, so it's very possible that he's got, like, almost no actual
he could just
strength.
be like a frail,
you know,
almost zombie.
If he were to get into a hand-to-hand fight, he could probably very well lose, and that's really the only thing I can think of. But honestly, that kind of makes him more terrifying, right? He is this really weak, sort of frail being, but
yeah, he can do all these things
with his mind tricks and his presence, right? He's able to intimidate people and not acting and not fighting him or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool, and that's something that you just don't see in today's horror films at all.
Yeah.
Anything like that. Because, like, on the other hand, Renfield is super strong. Like, he's always just breaking out of his confinement and just, like,
what is that all
breaking
about?
past the guards and stuff. Like, he's and like, even at near the end of the film, like, the guard who's, you know, the recurring guard character, he has this little, like, comedic line where he's like, "You're getting too strong for me." Renfield is, you know, which is really interesting. Like,
and he seems to be like, he's kind of portrayed as the most, like, powerless person, you know, to Dracula.
He's like, the film is all about mental power and willpower, right? Because, like you said, Renfield is portrayed as the weakest character. Despite being physically very strong, he's the weakest character because his will and his mind is the weakest. And I think it's really cool. And, like, you watch a lot of things nowadays, like, you know, like Christopher Nolan films, like Inception, or things like Breaking Bad, where it's like, people describe it as, like, mental chess, like the characters are playing chess with each other, and this film is like that as well. It's just like that, and I always appreciate a story like that where it is more about playing games. And I remember when we were watching this, I pointed this out to you a little bit, but I definitely see influences in modern films from Renfield's, the way the actor portrayed his character, like in Gollum, the Peter Jackson depiction of Gollum, and, like, the way he acts and and you know, like when he's talking about nice, juicy, fat spider, like that.
That might as well be a Gollum line.
Yeah, it basically is, because you know, there's the scene where Gollum is like talking to Samwise about eating raw squirrels, you know, and how he doesn't cook his food, and that immediately, like, my mind shot to that when I saw that when I heard that line from Renfield. Another thing that I really like about the performance is his laugh.
Yeah, he has like that maniacal.
He has that maniacal laugh, but at the same time, it sounds like somebody's crying. Like, it's amazing to me, because there's depth. There's a lot of depth to that specific laugh. And I can tell that a lot of work was put in both on the actor and the direction side of it, right? Like, it's definitely meant to sound like
a cry for help.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can hear Renfield internally, like, he's in agony and he's crying, and he's, you know, he doesn't want to do these things that Dracula makes him do, right? But he's also deranged and, like you said, absolutely maniacal. And so it's a laugh and a cry simultaneously, and it's just so, it's haunting. You know what, actually, well, I want to talk about Lucy for a second. I was sort of disappointed in how Lucy just dies off camera.
Yeah, and disappears for the whole movie.
Disappears. And
well, they mention her later, like, who's the white woman that's eating kids or whatever. I
would have liked to see that, but then again, that's sort of a theme that, with my opinion of the film, that's sort of a running theme of mine, I guess, that I would have preferred a lot more showing and not telling.
Yeah, I'd still think that's intentional, because it seems to be like we said with Dracula's like inner thoughts. You don't hear that. That's not told. Yeah. But a bunch of other things throughout the film are. So you have.
Yeah. I feel like there's a degree of it that is intentional, and there's also a degree that is just like constraints that they had, that they just couldn't, you know. I'm sure they had time constraints, because obviously if you wanted to show her dying off camera and then doing all that, like luring people in the streets of London and stuff, like that you would have had.
Yeah, it's not in the house, so you know.
It's not in the house. Yeah, exactly. It's on a completely different set, so you would have had to have a whole nother like shoot scheduled for that.
Right.
Obviously, when they're describing like the red eyes and like the colors, like obviously it's black and white, so
so you can't see it.
There's a constraint to that as well. I really liked Mina's character. I thought she's actually one of the best handled characters in the film. I mean, I don't know. I love the way that she's written, where it's sort of like she has no idea what's happening to her. And she's sort of being strung along, like she's being pulled in two different directions. You know, she's being pulled in one direction by Van Helsing, you know, to sort of, he's trying to tell her, like, Dracula's doing this to you, this is going to happen, we need to do all this stuff to be safe. And then she's being pulled in the other direction by Dracula. And I think it's interesting to me, because what's happening to her is that she's becoming a vampire and she's gaining these powers, but she has no idea that she has these powers. Like,
yeah, like when the bat's trying to like talk to her, and she says, yes, yeah, I will, and he's like, you will what?
Yeah, he's like, who are you talking to?
Do you think that she acts like she's like, I didn't say anything? Do you think she literally didn't think she said anything?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, because Dracula has been shown to have the ability to make people forget interactions he's had. This goes back to what I was talking about before, but I really would have liked to see more of that, and more of like Van Helsing's introduction, and spending more time, you know, like I said before, just fleshing out his character. And I honestly, I kind of feel the same for Dracula. Like, I know I said Dracula is obviously the focus of this film, and you do want to shroud a lot of
keep the mystery.
Like, you want to shroud him a lot in mystery, but at the same time, I would have liked to see. I don't know. I guess I just would have liked to see more of him. I guess it just goes to show how good the film is, that I just wanted to see more of it.
Right.
You know, more happen and more time spent
Yeah, it's definitely a better feeling than being like, I don't want to see this anymore. I just want to shut it off. Like,
Yeah.
leaving the audience wanting more is always better.
Yeah, I mean, I really would have liked to see, like, and this goes back to, wanting to see more of, like, Dracula, the character himself. But I would have liked to have more build-up, like, especially with, what he was doing to Mina and, like, all of that, and sort of more suspense. Not just in the scene where he actually does bite Mina, but just because in the film, it goes straight from Renfield saying, "No, don't do it to her," straight to him doing that to her. I really would have liked to see more suspense in between those two things. And you can, have. I would have liked to see Dracula, like, doing more to set up that event, so that the viewer, you get that dramatic irony where the viewer's like, "Oh no, what's he gonna do? What's he gonna do to Mina? Well, like, what's his intention?" Instead of just immediately going right to revealing exactly what he wants to do. I'm very glad I watched it, and
yeah, I think it was definitely a good choice that we kind of just were like, "Oh, Dracula sounds cool. Better watch that one."
He and I are making a horror film right now. Actually, we're in the works of a horror.
So yeah, this is definitely a huge source of inspiration that we're going to take into.
We're going to take a lot of
into our future endeavors.
We're going to learn. We're going to take a lot of lessons from this.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy more horror movies to come. There's definitely a huge list of them. They're gonna be so.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Bye.
Dracula. Ooh.